I have probably put Sabrina Carpenter and her latest antics on the thumbnail, but this isn't only about that. There's been this shift in culture in the past handful of years that is probably significant of some larger, eviler things, and I realize I might have unwittingly been a part of it. To date, still, for God knows what reason, this is my most viewed video, and in it I talk about the trope of forced romance and why it upsets my stomach, mapping the history of how that idea has existed in fiction for men and the very misogynistic overtones of it. And only following that video I've realized maybe a part of the reason it blew up was because I unwittingly played into the crowd that thinks sex scenes should be banned from movies entirely, or that there is at the very least too much sex and love making in movies. It has almost 100th of the views as of writing, but my last major video, which I consider my best overall, is about why I think people have the right to shake their fannies and skettle out as much as they want. The notion that Sexy Red is holding back black women or the black community as a whole for talking about how much she wants to go to Pound Town is ludicrous. I fully support the right for people to go as wacky and wild as they want. My protests, my real protests in that video, is force.
Don't force it.
I don't like forced romance. I don't like unnatural, obligatory, plastic heteronormativity. I want people to follow their joy wherever it lies. That's always been my stance on the matter, but the recent, I think, very silly Sabrina Carpenter thing reminds me, though, of just how prudish we've gotten. And the thing is, so many people think it's from a place of progressivism, but if you look at the history of literally any art form and how eroticism has existed in that form throughout the past century or so, you will get an entirely different story. Every other day, they do some kind of study that finds that the majority of Gen Z believes that there is too much sex and romance in movies and TV. Now, of course, these studies themselves should be scrutinized because a good chunk of the people being surveyed as Gen Z are literal teenagers, but there has been a movement of people my age genuinely believing that there is too much adult content, quote-unquote adult content, in entertainment, which, as a part of the small demographic of Gen Z that maybe primarily consumes media made before I was born, that is absolutely ludicrous. And if you know even the smallest bit of film knowledge, the current era of film is the most prudish we've been in decades. Where you may have a case though is television, where with the streaming age there has probably been more sex and nudity allowed on screen, on certain programs, on certain platforms than ever before. Especially penises. We've been getting a lot of penises recently, which is a good thing in my opinion. But media overall, no. You'd be shocked if you actually explored the content that was in fairly mainstream films back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, hell, even into the 2000s. Actually, addendum, even for mainstream family television back in the day, you'd be surprised just how much sexual stuff and quote-unquote adult content there was, because everyone was watching and you had to cater to all audiences. This was before the streaming age. Rewatch some episodes of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, you would truly be shocked. The young people have only been living now, consuming media from now. Again, as a zoomer, if an avant-garde one, I have an interesting relationship with the concept of now. I grew up more or less with the notion that things like gender equality, racial equality, and war were issues that we fixed in the past already. But in the past few years, I've been seeing before my eyes that that is so far from the case. I know this is the experience for many other people my age, especially guys who believe that gender equality has been solved, yet still find themselves believing that they are blamed when people scream about the patriarchy and how men ruined everything. That they grew up being told that their kind were the cause of all the evil, and yet they weren't seeing any of that evidence of that evil and didn't do anything themselves. What this is called is ignorance. If you're a white guy, precisely because of those systems, there are a lot of hardships that you just aren't going to see. There's a lot of privilege that you aren't even aware that you benefit from, and it isn't personally your fault, but you do exist within the frame. I never grew up being ogled at or hearing some grown-ass man saying psst 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 when I'm walking on the road. I have never had to worry about where my next meal was coming from. If you have access to this video right now, you are benefiting from worlds of privilege that many people in this world don't have for reasons that are not their faults, personally. The real point I'm getting at here is that there's a lot of vague senses that we have, particularly our generation, of the past due to things we don't know. And as the world has been getting progressively more evil, it is a propaganda tactic I've been noticing, a very common one. The weaponization of ignorance and vague sense of nostalgia for a time that did not exist. I listen to Piero Piccioni album on YouTube and go to the comments, and I'll see people describe that they wish they lived in what is ostensibly a scene from a movie. A 1950s countryside villa where your lover has arrived with a bouquet of flowers. A perpetual abstract image based on a vague, wistful feeling, without accounting for the actual material reality of that time or what that would look like. As someone whose entire media diet is mostly out of step with my time, I kinda hate the notion of I was born in the wrong generation, because it's coming from these kids with ready access to the media that people from those generations they supposedly wish they were born into didn't have. I personally am glad that I live in a generation where I can sync up a copy of a silent film on YouTube with a Playboy Carti album, or make edits of people from the 1950s dancing while a 70s Motown song is playing. That is a privilege unique to this time. Why have I gone on this whole tirade about time and nostalgia? Because the there is too much sex in movies crowd is largely, not all of them, but largely unknowingly appealing to a vague sense of comfort based on a time and set of moralistic principles coming from this very traditional, very prudish sense of properness, often under the pretense of feminism. Now, having said that, I do think that something is happening now. What I do believe is unique to our generation is that our whole relationship with the concept of sex and romance has been damaged, I think, by a shared trauma. I don't think there is more sex in entertainment now than at any other point in history, but I'm sure Gen Z is seeing more sex in an audiovisual form over screens than any other generation in history. It's a very obvious point when you think about it, the most obvious, but has there ever been any other point in history where people's first exposure to sex on screens, hell, probably the concept of sex in general, is through hardcore pornography? Yes, pornography, corn. I'm gonna say corn because this platform hates me. Often by accident, as kids. Maybe you're 11 years old trying to sail the seas to access some obscure Disney film because you're in your Disney era, and you go on a funny site, and as you click, something strange pops up, and you don't know what it is. Is that just me? I do think our generation shares this unique trauma that it has never been easier to access sex in the audio-visual form in that way than at any other point in history, which then distorts our relationship with the whole concept. Another part of what we're seeing, I think, is people reacting to that trauma in different ways. By and large, we don't know how to process the concept of sex in an audiovisual form besides that of the pornographic. This is one of the common things I see people saying on social media. There is no need for sex to exist on screens besides porn. If it's there, you're basically just watching porn. Euphoria is basically just corn. Let me stop saying that word. Challengers, the film that literally has no sex scenes at all, is just corn. If the human body is portrayed in its nakedness on a screen at all, it is corn. We don't know how to process these things besides the concept of corn. I hate this. This is the problem. This is another distinct thing that we share in this current era, and without the context that this stuff has existed much longer, and corn didn't used to be as accessible as it is now. And this isn't an anti-corn video, let's be clear about that. I have a lot of thoughts about this actually. I'd argue the no-fap type crowd is they're a big part of the problem that they claim they're here to fight. I think there is a problem though, but I'm not sure that the blame is put in the right places. What I do think is that as a generation, we've been heavily traumatized. We've lost our sense of eroticism. We've lost our sexual whimsy. It's interesting. It's like the opposite of what happened when the free love movement came about in the mid-60s in a response to the era of censorship and hyper-conservatism of the 1950s. In the West, particularly the Americas, actually certain parts of Europe are much better, we still live and have always been in this purity culture, sacred versus profane cultural Christianity. But in spite of that culture, we are human beings. The problem with purity culture is this often very dogmatic killing of self, this rejection of humanity, and framing it as mortal weakness. What's happened in part, I think, is that it's been easier than it's ever been to stumble, as they put it. Access to this very specific kind of portrayal of sex is so limitless on the internet, and people this age have had to deal with that. This is pure postulation. The structure of the pseudo video essay makes it sound sometimes like a statement of fact, but this is just theory. I'm going off dome. But I think a large part of what we're seeing is also a guilt response by a generation, I think, that has been collectively traumatized by such easy access to this kind of thing, to the degree that it has not only skewed how they view the topic of love and sex in total, but also created increasingly, I think, this visceral reaction. I want to get away from the corn talk because last time I tried to engage with this topic directly on this platform, the video got age restricted. But I think a part of it goes back to that idea of performance and spectacle. In conversation with more conservative people on women exposing a certain degree of skin, a common thing I hear is that they're selling their bodies or degrading themselves. The question to that becomes, what does that mean?
What does that mean?
I used to think in this way, even as I was on my path to enlightenment, and this is in the video I just made as well. But there's a big thing where people believe that women portraying themselves a certain way is degrading to themselves, or self-objectification. The whole concept of selling your body, especially in the context, bring it back to Sabrina Carpenter, of a consumerist industry like music. The question becomes though, what does it even mean to self-objectify? Sabrina Carpenter's main base is, well, to be very general, it's the girls and the gays, isn't it? She's portraying herself in this way, but the consumer base when you go to these concerts is mostly them. Even in this album cover, she's all dolled up and bowing to the man, but who is this for, and why is she displaying herself in this way? Is it display, or is it expression? I do think she's selling something, and all this discourse is exactly what she and her team want, but also what is the object here? An object is a possession. It is a thing that cannot think or feel itself. It is a thing that is controlled, looked at, and passed around by observers. What I find often with the she is degrading herself crowd is that there is a sense that everything a woman, or indeed person, does is specifically to get a reaction out of you. You specifically. Going back to the conversation that will get me age restricted, the thing about corn, especially in the particular form that exists now, is that it is specifically designed to get a certain physiological reaction out of the viewer. So the viewer, in other words, 99.9% of Gen Z, who's now grown very afraid of sex, is used to a version of cinematic lovemaking that is designed specifically to make them get their rocks off. Though what you will notice if you watch any sex scene in another kind of film, or look at a nude painting, or look at a nude sculpture, they're not meant to specifically get that reaction out of you. They're doing other things. There is more life there. In a film, you may get a scene where a character wishes to physically express their affection for another character. In a piece of music, A performer may wish to express their desires or feelings, but, and maybe this does go into some other stuff about isolation, the present viewer is used to a world where they can literally pause, rewind, stop watching, speed up. It's all customizable. It's all for you. The sex scene is to make you get your rocks off. The performer is wearing all those clothes for you. By telling a woman that the way she chooses to express herself is degrading to her, you are once again removing her agency, reducing her entire sense of self to pure subservience. Yet again, a character in your story, less of a person and more of a thing whose body you have the right to police and tell her what she's too stupid to know herself. Let me say something. This isn't gendered. Women can objectify women as well. Like, I don't know what kink thing Sabrina is into, but it is her body and it is her art. Maybe discourse can happen after the album has been released, at least. But this is her body and this is her art. I think when you start blaming the objectification of women on women, you've lost the plot.